My daughter threw my suitcase onto the front porch and told me I had 15 minutes to leave before she called the police on her own mother. I stood there, 67 years old, watching my belongings scatter across the wooden boards like the broken pieces of a life I thought I understood. The morning sun was warm on my face, but inside, everything had turned to ice. What hurt the most was not the eviction itself. It was the fact that I had given her everything, including the house she was now throwing me out of. But she did not know the whole truth. None of them did. And by the time this story ends, you will understand why that ignorance cost them everything they thought they had earned. Let me tell you how I got here. Let me explain what led to that moment on the porch and what happened after, because the ending is not what anyone expected, least of all me. My name is Vivian Ashford. I am 67 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed that love meant sacrifice. I believed that a good mother gives everything and asks for nothing. I believed that family would always be there, that blood was thicker than water, that the children you raise with devotion will honor you in your final years. I was wrong about all of it. But I did not learn how wrong until that Thursday morning in late September, when my daughter Margot stood in the doorway of the house I had signed over to her 3 years earlier and told me I was no longer welcome in my own home. The house on Birchwood Lane had been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandmother had planted the magnolia tree in the front yard. My grandmother had added the wraparound porch. My mother had installed the kitchen where I learned to cook, where I taught Margot to cook, where I imagined one day teaching grandchildren the same recipes that had been passed down through generations of Ashford women. When my husband Theodore passed away 11 years ago, I made a decision that seemed wise at the time. I decided to simplify my life. I decided to transfer the house to Margot, my only child, as a gift of trust and love. I kept a small apartment downtown for myself, a modest 2-bedroom place where I could live independently while still being close enough to visit. The arrangement was supposed to benefit everyone. Margot and her husband Derek would have a beautiful family home without the burden of a mortgage. I would have peace of mind knowing the house was in capable hands, and we would all remain close, bound by love and gratitude and the unspoken promise that family takes care of family. For the first 2 years, the arrangement worked perfectly. I visited every Sunday for dinner. Margot would call me during the week to share news about her job at the marketing firm, about Derek's promotion at the accounting office, about their plans to renovate the kitchen. I helped them financially when they needed it, quietly transferring money for unexpected expenses, never asking for acknowledgement, never expecting anything in return except the continued warmth of our relationship. But then everything changed. It started so gradually that I almost did not notice. The Sunday dinners became less frequent, then disappeared entirely. The phone calls grew shorter, more businesslike, less intimate. When I visited, Margot seemed distracted, impatient, eager for me to leave. Derek barely looked at me anymore, spending most of my visits in the basement or out in the garage, avoiding conversation. I told myself they were busy. I told myself that marriage requires adjustment, that young couples need space, that my presence was probably overwhelming them. I made excuses for their coldness because the alternative was too painful to consider. Before I continue, if you have ever felt invisible to the people you love most, if you have ever wondered whether your sacrifices matter to anyone but yourself, make sure you are subscribed, because this story will show you that you are not alone. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 7 months before the eviction. I had stopped by unannounced with groceries, something I had done hundreds of times over the years. The front door was locked, which was unusual during the day. I used my key, the key I had kept since transferring the house, and let myself in. The house was quiet except for voices coming from the kitchen. I heard Margot say my name, and I stopped in the hallway to listen. What I heard made my blood run cold. "She cannot keep coming here whenever she wants," Margot was saying. "This is our house now. She gave it to us. She needs to understand that the gift came with boundaries." Derek's voice was lower, harder to hear. "But she still has a key. She acts like she owns the place." Margot laughed, and the sound was bitter, nothing like the laughter I remembered from her childhood. "She acts like she owns everything. My time, my attention, my gratitude. Do you know she called me 3 times yesterday? 3 times. To tell me about a recipe she saw on television. As if I care about her recipes." I stood frozen in that hallway, my arms full of groceries, my heart breaking in slow motion. The daughter I had raised, the girl I had nursed through fevers and taught to ride a bicycle and held while she cried over teenage heartbreaks, was standing in my family's kitchen, mocking me to her husband. And Derek, the man I had welcomed into our family, the man I had helped financially more times than I could count, was agreeing with every word. "Maybe we should change the locks," Derek suggested. "Tell her you lost the key or something. That way she has to call before coming over." Margot considered this. "That might work. Or we could just tell her directly. Set boundaries. Explain that we need space to build our own family traditions without her hovering all the time." Derek agreed. "She is not going to take it well. You know how she is. So sensitive about everything. Remember how she cried when we did not invite her to the holiday party?" Margot sighed. "She is exhausting. Honestly, sometimes I wish she would just go live in one of those retirement communities. Get friends her own age. Stop depending on us for her entire social life." I do not know how long I stood there. Time seemed to stop. Eventually, I quietly set the groceries on the hallway table and let myself out. I walked to my car in a daze, drove back to my apartment, and sat in the darkness of my living room until the sun went down. I did not cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was the kind of wound that bleeds internally, invisible to everyone but the person carrying it. That night, I made a decision. I would not confront them about what I had overheard. I would not demand apologies or explanations. Instead, I would watch. I would wait. I would pay attention to the truth that had been hiding beneath the surface of our relationship for years. And I would protect myself in ways I had never thought necessary before. The weeks that followed were an education in disappointment. Once I started looking, the signs of their contempt were everywhere. Margot would answer my calls with impatience in her voice, cutting our conversations short with transparent excuses. Derek would avoid eye contact when I visited, retreating to other rooms as quickly as possible. They began declining my invitations to dinner at my apartment, always with reasons that sounded plausible but felt hollow. And the financial requests continued, despite their obvious desire to keep me at a distance. They still needed money for car repairs, for home improvements, for unexpected bills. They still expected me to provide, even as they treated my presence as a burden. During this period, I learned something important about myself. I learned that I had been so focused on giving that I had forgotten how to receive. I had been so determined to be a good mother that I had ignored my own worth as a person. I had built my entire identity around my role in their lives, and now that role was being dismantled piece by piece, leaving nothing behind but emptiness and regret. There was one person who saw what was happening, my neighbor and dear friend Eleanor. We had known each other for 40 years, since our children were in diapers. Eleanor had watched Margot grow up. She had been at Theodore's funeral. She knew our family history better than almost anyone. One evening in May, she came to my apartment with a bottle of wine and a concerned expression. "Vivian," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When was the last time Margot called you just to talk? Not to ask for something, not to schedule a visit, just to hear your voice." I thought about it for a long moment. The answer was shameful, and I did not want to admit it out loud. I cannot remember, I finally said. Maybe Christmas? And even then, she was mostly telling me what gifts to buy for Derek's parents. Eleanor nodded slowly. That is what I was afraid of. Vivian, I have been watching this situation for months now. I see how they treat you. I hear the things Margot says about you when she thinks no one is listening. Last week, I overheard her at the pharmacy, complaining to a friend about how clingy you are, how you expect too much, how you gave her the house but act like it is still yours. My hands trembled as I set down my wine glass. I have tried so hard to be a good mother, I said. I gave her everything, the house, money, my time, my energy, my whole heart. What more could she possibly want from me? Eleanor reached across the table and took my hand. She wants you to disappear, she said gently. She wants the benefits of having a generous mother without the inconvenience of having to actually be a daughter. And until you stop enabling that dynamic, nothing is going to change. Her words cut deep, but they also awakened something inside me. A small spark of self-respect that had been dormant for years. Eleanor was right. I had been so desperate to maintain the illusion of a loving family that I had allowed myself to be used and discarded. I had confused sacrifice with love, enabling with support, doormat behavior with maternal devotion. But even then, even with Eleanor's wisdom ringing in my ears, I could not bring myself to take action. I was still hoping that things would get better. I was still clinging to the memory of the daughter Margot used to be, the little girl who had climbed into my lap and told me I was the best mother in the whole world. I was not ready to accept that that girl was gone forever. June arrived with heat and humidity and a phone call that changed everything. Margot called on a Sunday morning, earlier than usual, her voice bright with excitement. "Mom," she said, "I have wonderful news. Derek and I are having a baby." For one shining moment, all my doubts and fears evaporated. A grandchild, a new generation, a chance to rebuild our family bonds around the miracle of new life. I wept with joy, told Margot how happy I was, began making plans in my head for the nursery, for the baby shower, for all the ways I would support them through this new chapter. "That is wonderful, sweetheart," I said. "When are you due?" "December," she replied. "Right around Christmas. Is it not perfect?" I was already imagining holiday dinners with a baby in my arms, teaching my grandchild the family traditions that Margot had dismissed as boring. "Of course," she continued, her tone shifting slightly. "This does change things a bit. The house, I mean. We are going to need more space now." I felt a flicker of unease, but pushed it aside. "Of course," I said, "whatever you need." "Are you thinking about renovations?" "Yes, actually. The basement would make a perfect playroom, but it needs a lot of work. And we should probably update the kitchen before the baby comes. Food preparation is so important for infants." I agreed with everything she said. I offered to help with the costs. I was so happy about the pregnancy that I failed to notice the manipulation inherent in her words. She was using my joy against me, extracting commitments while my defenses were down. It was a pattern I would recognize later, but in that moment, I was blind to everything except the promise of a grandchild. 3 weeks later, Margot called again. This time, her voice was different, colder, more businesslike. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation. Can you come over tomorrow afternoon?" I agreed, of course. I would have agreed to anything she asked. But as I hung up the phone, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Something in her tone had triggered my survival instincts, the same instincts I had been ignoring for months. I arrived at the house at 2 o'clock the next day. Margot and Derek were waiting for me in the living room, seated side by side on the couch like a tribunal. They did not offer me tea or coffee. They did not ask how I was doing. They just gestured toward the armchair across from them and waited for me to sit down. "Mom," Margot began, her hands folded in her lap, "we have been thinking about the future, about what is best for our growing family. We have made some decisions that we need to share with you." I nodded, trying to appear calm despite the racing of my heart. "Of course, sweetheart. What kind of decisions?" Derek cleared his throat and spoke for the first time. "Vivian, we appreciate everything you have done for us over the years. The house, the financial support, all of it. But we feel like there have been some, how should I put this, boundary issues that need to be addressed." "Boundary issues," I repeated, my voice hollow. Margot jumped in. "You have been very involved in our lives, Mom. Maybe too involved. You stop by unannounced. You call multiple times a day. You offer opinions on things that are really none of your business. And now that we are having a baby, we need to establish some new ground rules." I sat in silence, watching my daughter's face for any sign of the warmth I used to see there. There was none. She looked at me the way one might look at a persistent salesperson or an annoying coworker, with tolerance perhaps, but no affection. "What kind of ground rules?" I asked quietly. Derek pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. "We have written them down," he said. "First, no more unannounced visits. You need to call at least 24 hours in advance and wait for confirmation before coming over. Second, phone calls should be limited to once per week, unless there is an emergency. Third, no more unsolicited advice about our home, our finances, or our parenting choices. Fourth, and this is important, we need you to return your key to the house." I stared at the paper in his hands, at the neat bullet points listing the conditions of my continued relationship with my daughter. I had given them this house. I had supported them financially for years, and now they were presenting me with a contract, treating me like a nuisance to be managed, rather than a mother to be loved. "And if I do not agree to these terms?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Margot exchanged a glance with Derek before answering. "Then we will need to reconsider the nature of our relationship going forward. We cannot have negativity or resistance around the baby. Our child's well-being has to come first." The threat was clear. Accept their conditions or lose access to my grandchild before it was even born. I sat there for a long moment, feeling the walls of my world closing in. Then I did something that surprised us all, including myself. "May I have some time to think about this?" I asked calmly. Margot frowned. "What is there to think about? These are reasonable requests, Mom. Any normal person would understand that." I nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But I have spent 67 years making decisions based on what other people want. I think I have earned the right to consider my own feelings for once." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, Margot sighed and waved her hand dismissively. "Fine, take a week. But we need your answer by next Sunday." I agreed and left the house without another word. But as I drove back to my apartment, something had shifted inside me. The desperation that had driven my behavior for months was gone, replaced by a cold clarity that felt almost like relief. I had spent so long trying to hold on to a relationship that no longer existed. Perhaps it was time to let go. That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Eleanor, who listened to everything and then said exactly what I needed to hear. "Vivian, you have been a wonderful mother, but you cannot force people to love you. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying." The second call was to my lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had handled Theodore's estate 11 years earlier. I explained my situation and asked her to review the paperwork for the house transfer. What I learned from that conversation changed everything. "Mrs. Ashford," Patricia said, her voice careful and professional, "when you transferred the house to your daughter 3 years ago, did you discuss any conditions or expectations with her?" I thought back to that day, to the signing of the documents, to my naive assumption that love would protect me better than any legal agreement. No, I admitted. I trusted her. I thought putting conditions on a gift would be insulting. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I understand, but I need to tell you something important. During the review of your late husband's estate, I discovered some documents that I set aside because they did not seem relevant at the time. However, given what you have just told me, I think you should see them. What kind of documents? I asked. Financial records, she replied. Investment accounts that Theodore opened in your name decades ago. Accounts that have been growing with compound interest ever since. Vivian, according to these records, you are worth significantly more than you realize. Significantly more. My third phone call that night was to a locksmith. I asked him to change the locks on my apartment, to make copies of the new keys for Eleanor and no one else. As I hung up the phone, I looked around at my modest living room, at the secondhand furniture and the discount store curtains, and I started to laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was the laughter of someone who has just discovered that the cage they have been living in was never locked to begin with. The week that followed was the most transformative of my life. Patricia Chen arrived at my apartment 2 days later with a briefcase full of documents and an expression that was equal parts professional concern and personal curiosity. She spread the papers across my kitchen table like evidence in a trial and walked me through what Theodore had done. Your husband was a careful man, she explained. In the early years of your marriage, before Margot was born, he set up a series of investment accounts in your name. He funded them with portions of his salary over several decades, always choosing low-risk, long-term growth options. He never told you about these accounts because he wanted you to have security if something happened to him, security that no one could take away from you. I looked at the numbers on the papers, not fully comprehending what I was seeing. Patricia, I said slowly, are you telling me that Theodore left me wealthy? She nodded. The accounts currently total just over $4 million. They are entirely in your name. They have been generating interest this whole time, compounding year after year. Your husband essentially gave you a financial fortress, and you have been living as though you were destitute. $4 million. The number seemed impossible, like something from a dream. I had been living in a modest apartment, shopping at discount stores, worrying about every expense, while millions of dollars sat untouched in accounts I did not know existed. Why did he not tell me? I whispered. Patricia considered the question carefully. I cannot say for certain, but based on the notes he left with the documents, I believe he wanted to protect you from yourself. He wrote that you had a generous heart, that you would give everything away if you thought someone needed it. He wanted to make sure you always had something that could not be taken from you, even by the people you loved most. Tears streamed down my face as I read Theodore's handwriting in the margins of the old documents. Notes he had written decades ago, instructions for a future he knew he might not see. For Vivian, my love, my partner, my reason, may this gift give you the freedom to live on your own terms, always. He knew, I said. He knew that I would need protection someday. Patricia began gathering the documents back into her briefcase. He knew you well, she agreed. Now the question is, what do you want to do with this information? I thought about Margot, about the ultimatum she had delivered, about the coldness in her eyes when she handed me that list of rules. I thought about Derek, counting the months until I was completely out of their lives. I thought about my unborn grandchild, who would grow up hearing stories about the clingy, demanding grandmother who had to be kept at a distance. And then I thought about Theodore, about the love he had shown me in ways I was only now beginning to understand. He had given me power. The question was whether I had the courage to use it. I want to know everything, I told Patricia. Every account, every investment, every asset I did not know I had. And then I want you to help me make a plan. Over the following days, I learned the full extent of my situation. In addition to the $4 million in investments, Theodore had left me as the beneficiary on several insurance policies that I had assumed were depleted years ago. He had purchased bonds in my name that had matured into substantial sums. He had even acquired a small commercial property downtown that had been generating rental income into an account I had never thought to check. All told, my net worth was closer to $6 million. I had been living like a pauper while sitting on a fortune that could have changed my life at any point in the last 11 years. But the money was not what mattered most. What mattered was what the money represented. Freedom. The freedom to make choices based on what I wanted, not what I was afraid of losing. The freedom to demand respect instead of begging for scraps of affection. The freedom to walk away from people who treated me like an inconvenience, even if those people were my own flesh and blood. The Sunday deadline arrived. I drove to the house on Birchwood Lane one last time, not to capitulate, but to deliver a message of my own. Margot and Derek were waiting in the living room again, seated in the same positions, wearing the same expectant expressions. They assumed I had come to surrender. They could not have been more wrong. "Well," Margot said, not bothering with pleasantries, "have you thought about what we discussed? Are you ready to agree to the new arrangement?" I sat down in the armchair across from them and folded my hands in my lap. "I have thought about it extensively," I replied, "and I have made some decisions of my own." Margot's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of decisions?" "First," I said, "I will be returning the key to this house, as you requested, but not because you demanded it. I am returning it because I no longer want access to a place where I am not welcome." Derek shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Well, good. That is reasonable." "Second," I continued, ignoring his interruption, "I will no longer be providing financial support of any kind. The renovations you mentioned, the baby expenses, any future emergencies, you will need to handle those on your own." Margot's face flushed with anger. "You cannot be serious. We are having a baby, your grandchild. Are you really going to abandon us over a few simple boundaries?" I looked at her steadily, seeing not the daughter I had loved, but the stranger she had become. "Those boundaries, as you call them, were designed to minimize my presence in your life while maximizing my financial contributions. You want my money without my love. You want my support without my company. That is not a relationship, Margot. That is exploitation." The room went very quiet. Derek's face had gone pale. Margot's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "You are being dramatic," she said finally. "We never asked you to disappear. We just wanted some space." I nodded slowly. "And you shall have it. All the space you could ever want. From this day forward, our relationship will be exactly what you have made it, transactional and distant. You are no longer my daughter in any meaningful sense. You are simply a woman who lives in a house that used to belong to my family." Margot stood up so quickly that she knocked over a lamp on the side table. "How dare you?" she screamed. "After everything we have put up with, your constant neediness, your pathetic attempts to buy our affection, your sad little visits where you just sit and stare at us like a lost puppy. You think we wanted you around? You think we enjoyed pretending to care about your boring stories and your ancient recipes?" Her words should have hurt, but they did not. They confirmed what I had suspected for months. The love I thought we shared had been an illusion all along. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, standing up and moving toward the door. "It makes what comes next much easier." "What comes next?" Derek asked, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. "What is that supposed to mean?" I paused at the doorway and looked back at them one last time. "You will find out soon enough. Goodbye, Margot. I wish you well with your growing family." I walked out of that house with my head held high, leaving behind the key, the memories, and the last remnants of hope that my daughter would ever truly love me. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It was also the most necessary. The summer passed in a blur of activity. I worked with Patricia Chen to restructure my finances, to update my estate plans, to ensure that my assets would go exactly where I wanted them to go. I traveled for the first time in years, visiting cities I had always dreamed of seeing. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my years of obsessive devotion to Margot. I discovered that there was a whole world beyond the narrow confines of my family drama, a world that welcomed me with open arms. Eleanor became my constant companion during this period. We went to the theater together, took cooking classes, joined a book club at the local library. For the first time since Theodore's death, I felt genuinely alive, not merely existing, but actually living. One September morning, Eleanor arrived at my apartment with news that made my blood run cold. "I saw Margot yesterday," she said carefully, "at the grocery store. She was very pregnant, very stressed, and she asked about you." I set down my coffee cup. What did she want to know? Eleanor hesitated. "Whether you had mentioned anything about money, about Theodore's estate, about any accounts or investments that she might not know about." My heart sank. How did she find out? "She did not say exactly," Eleanor replied, "but she mentioned that Derek had been doing some research, looking into public records, financial filings, that sort of thing. I think he discovered that you are not as poor as you led them to believe." I sat in silence for a long moment, processing this information. Of course they had been investigating. Of course their interest in me had revived the moment they suspected I had something they wanted. The pregnancy had probably accelerated their plans. They needed money for the baby, and they thought they knew where to get it. "What else did she say?" I asked quietly. Eleanor looked uncomfortable. "She said she wanted to talk to you, to clear the air. She said she felt terrible about how things ended and wanted to make amends before the baby arrived." I nodded slowly. "And you think she means it?" Eleanor was quiet for a long time before answering. "I think Margot loves money more than she loves people," she said finally. "I think she and Derek have gotten themselves into financial trouble, and they see you as the solution. I think if you reconcile with them now, they will take everything you have and discard you the moment the check clears." Her assessment was brutal but accurate. I had raised a daughter who saw love as currency and family as an investment portfolio. The fault was partly mine. I had enabled her selfishness for years. But the solution was not to continue enabling. The solution was to protect myself. "I am not going to reconcile with them," I told Eleanor. "But I am not going to hide from them either. If they want to know the truth about my finances, I will show them, just not in the way they expect." 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Margot. It was the first direct communication since our confrontation in June. The tone was warm, apologetic, completely unlike the cold woman who had handed me a list of rules and demanded compliance. "Dear Mom," the letter began, "I have been doing a lot of thinking since we last spoke, and I realize that I handled things badly. Pregnancy hormones have made me emotional and irrational. I said things I did not mean. I hurt you, and I am truly sorry. Can we please meet for lunch and talk things through? I miss you, and I want my child to know their grandmother." I read the letter 3 times, noting the careful phrasing, the strategic deployment of guilt and sentiment. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Every word had been chosen to achieve maximum effect. I called Patricia Chen and told her it was time to implement the plan we had discussed. 3 days later, I met Margot for lunch at a restaurant downtown. She was heavily pregnant now, her belly straining against a designer maternity dress that must have cost several $100s. She hugged me warmly when I arrived, told me how wonderful I looked, complimented my jewelry and my haircut. The performance was flawless. "Mom," she said once we were seated, I am so glad you agreed to meet me. I have been sick with guilt over how I treated you. Derek and I both have. We were wrong to push you away, and we want to make things right. I smiled pleasantly and ordered a glass of wine. That is very kind of you to say, Margot. What exactly did you have in mind? She leaned forward eagerly. Well, first, I want you to be part of the baby's life. Really part of it, not just occasional visits. We want you at the hospital when she is born. We want you to babysit, to help with nighttime feedings, to be a real grandmother. She, I repeated. You are having a girl? Margot beamed. We found out last week. We are naming her Charlotte, after Derek's grandmother. Not after any of the Ashford women, I noted silently. Not after my mother or grandmother or great-grandmother. After Derek's family, the family that mattered to them. That is a lovely name, I said. And what else? Margot took a deep breath. Well, this is difficult to say, but Derek and I have had some financial setbacks. The renovation costs were higher than expected, and with the baby coming, things are tight. We were hoping you might be able to help. There it was, the real purpose of this reconciliation lunch. Not love, not guilt, not a genuine desire to repair our relationship. Just money. What kind of help did you have in mind? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Margot launched into a prepared speech about expenses and bills and unexpected costs. She mentioned specific amounts, tens of thousands of dollars needed immediately, with the promise of repayment that we both knew would never come. She talked about how grateful they would be, how this would bring us closer together, how it would prove that I really loved her and wanted to be part of their family. I listened to every word, nodding occasionally, asking clarifying questions, giving no indication of my true feelings. When she finished, I took a sip of my wine and set the glass down carefully. Margot, I said, I appreciate your honesty about your financial situation, and I want to help. Truly, I do. But before I can make any commitments, I need to be honest with you as well. Her eyes lit up with greed poorly disguised as hope. Of course, Mom. Anything. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder of documents that Patricia had prepared. You and Derek have been doing some research into my finances. I know because my lawyer informed me that someone has been requesting copies of public records related to my accounts and properties. Margot's face went pale. I do not know what you are talking about. Please do not insult my intelligence, I said calmly. You discovered that I have more money than you realized, and you decided to reconcile with me in order to access those funds. It is a reasonable strategy. I do not blame you for trying. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. You are correct that I am wealthier than I have appeared. Your father set up a series of investments before he died, and those investments have grown considerably over the years. I am, by most standards, a wealthy woman. Margot's greed was now naked on her face. She made no attempt to hide it. Then you can help us, she said eagerly. You can give us what we need. Think about Charlotte, Mom. Think about your granddaughter. I slid the folder across the table. Open it, I said. She opened the folder and began reading the documents inside. As she read, her expression changed from anticipation to confusion to disbelief to horror. What is this? She whispered. That, I replied, is my new will. As you can see, I have restructured my estate significantly. The bulk of my assets will now go to various charities that support elderly people who have been abandoned or abused by their families. There is also a substantial donation to the local women's shelter and a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Margot looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. But what about me? What about Charlotte? I took another sip of wine. There is a trust fund for Charlotte that will become available when she turns 30. It will be managed by an independent trustee with strict conditions. She will have access to the money only if she demonstrates financial responsibility and good character. As for you, I said, meeting her eyes directly, you will inherit the contents of a safety deposit box at my bank. That box contains letters I have written over the years, documenting every moment of love and sacrifice and hope that I poured into raising you. Those letters are the only inheritance you deserve. Mom, Margot gasped, you cannot do this. I am your daughter. I have rights. You have no rights to my money, I said firmly. The law is very clear on that point. I can leave my estate to whoever I choose, and I choose to leave it to people who will appreciate it. People who understand that love is not transactional, that family is not a business arrangement, that kindness does not have a price tag. Margot's face contorted with rage. You are doing this to punish me, because I tried to set boundaries, because I wanted space. You are a petty, vindictive old woman who cannot handle being told no. I stood up and gathered my purse. No, Margot. I am a mother who finally learned to value herself. I am a woman who discovered too late that the daughter she raised has no capacity for genuine love. And I am a person who refuses to spend the rest of my days being used and discarded by people who see me as a walking wallet. I left money on the table for the check and walked toward the exit. Margot called after me, her voice rising in desperation. Mom, wait. We can talk about this. We can work something out, please. I turned back one final time. You had years to work something out, I said. Years when I would have given you anything you asked for, simply because you asked. But you chose to treat me with contempt instead of love. You chose manipulation over honesty. You chose money over relationship. And now you will live with the consequences of those choices. I walked out of the restaurant and did not look back. The next month was chaotic. Margot called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations to desperate bargaining. Derek sent formal letters through a lawyer, challenging the validity of my new will and threatening legal action. Their tactics were predictable, the response of people who had lost a valuable asset and were scrambling to recover it. I ignored all of it. Patricia Chen handled the legal threats with professional efficiency, documenting everything for potential future proceedings. Eleanor kept me company during the difficult nights when doubt crept in and I wondered if I had made the right decision. Then came the September morning, the morning of the eviction. I had gone to the house on Birchwood Lane one final time, not to reconcile, but to collect some family photographs that I had left behind years earlier. The magnolia tree my great-grandmother had planted was in full bloom, its white flowers perfuming the air with memories of happier times. I let myself in with the spare key that had been hidden under a garden stone since my childhood. The house was quiet, and I assumed Margot and Derek were out. I gathered the photographs from the hall closet, pausing to look at images of my mother as a young woman, of my grandmother on her wedding day, of Theodore and me on our honeymoon. That was when Margot appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a bathrobe, her pregnant belly enormous, her face twisted with fury. "What are you doing here?" she screamed. "This is my house. You have no right to be here." I held up the photographs. "I came for these family pictures. They belong to your great-grandmother. I am taking them to preserve them." Margot descended the stairs slowly, her hand gripping the railing. "Those are my pictures now," she said. "Everything in this house belongs to me. You gave it all away, remember? You do not get to come back and take things whenever you feel like it." I remained calm, even as my heart pounded with grief and fear. These photographs predate the transfer. They are not part of the house. They are family heirlooms that I am entitled to keep. Margot laughed bitterly. "You are entitled to nothing. You think you can waltz in here, cut me out of your will, and then help yourself to my property? Do you know what you are? You are a bitter, selfish woman who never loved anyone but herself." I looked at my daughter, at the stranger she had become, and felt the last remnants of hope die inside me. "That is not true," I said quietly. "I have loved you every day of your life. Even now, even after everything you have done, I still love you. But loving someone does not mean letting them destroy you." Margot's face contorted with rage. "Get out!" she screamed. "Get out of my house and never come back. I am done with you. Done with your guilt trips and your pathetic attempts to control me. Get out." I walked toward the door, still holding the photographs. Margot followed me onto the porch, still screaming. Then she did something that changed everything. She grabbed my suitcase, the one I had brought to carry the photographs, and threw it onto the front lawn. The latches burst open, scattering pictures across the grass, images of 4 generations of Ashford women trampled beneath my daughter's bare feet. "15 minutes," Margot shouted. "You have 15 minutes to get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I stood on that porch, 67 years old, watching my history scatter in the morning breeze. And something inside me, something that had been holding on by a thread, finally let go. I did not pick up the photographs. I did not argue or plead or cry. I simply walked to my car, got behind the wheel, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see Margot standing on the porch, her hand on her pregnant belly, watching me leave. That was the moment I understood what Eleanor had been telling me all along. You cannot force people to love you. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying. The following weeks were a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I mourned the relationship I had lost, the daughter I had believed in, the family I had thought we would become. But I also celebrated my freedom, my independence, my rediscovered sense of self-worth. Eleanor helped me process the complicated emotions. We spent long evenings on her patio, drinking wine and talking about mothers and daughters, about expectations and disappointments, about the courage it takes to walk away from people who hurt you. "She will come back eventually," Eleanor said one night. "When the baby is born and the bills pile up, and she realizes that Derek is not going to solve all their problems. She will come back and expect you to welcome her with open arms." "I know," I replied, "but I will not be there when she does. I have given her enough of my life. The rest belongs to me." Eleanor raised her glass. "To you, Vivian, to the woman you are becoming." I touched my glass to hers, to both of us, to all the women who are learning, finally, that we deserve better. 3 months later, I received a birth announcement in the mail. Charlotte Ann had arrived, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, mother and daughter doing well. There was no personal note, no invitation to meet my granddaughter, just the formal announcement printed on expensive cardstock. I looked at the announcement for a long time, feeling a complicated mixture of joy and sorrow. A new life had entered the world. A child who carried my genes and would grow up without knowing me. It was a loss, certainly, but it was also a relief. I would not have to watch Margot poison Charlotte against me. I would not have to endure the manipulation and rejection. I would not have to pretend that our relationship was something it was not. I sent a gift to the hospital, a substantial check made out to a college savings fund in Charlotte's name, along with a note explaining that I loved her and hoped she would grow up to be a kind and honest person. I did not expect a thank you, and I did not receive one. The winter passed quietly. I continued to travel, to explore, to build a life that did not revolve around my daughter's approval. I joined a support group for estranged parents, discovering that my story was far from unique. The room was full of mothers and fathers who had been cut off by children they loved, who were struggling to understand what had gone wrong, who were learning to forgive themselves for crimes they had never committed. In that room, I found my next purpose. I began volunteering with organizations that helped elderly people who had been abandoned or exploited by their families. I donated money, of course, but I also donated time. sitting with people who had nobody else, listening to their stories, letting them know they were not alone. Theodore's gift had given me financial security, but it was the journey of losing Margot that gave me something even more valuable, the wisdom to know what truly mattered. And what truly mattered was not money or property or inheritance. What truly mattered was being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you had treated yourself with the same kindness you had given to everyone else. Spring arrived with birdsong and flowers and a letter that I had not expected. The return address was Margot's, but the handwriting was not hers. It was Derek's. "Dear Vivian," the letter began, "I am writing to apologize for my role in the way you have been treated. Margot and I are divorcing. The stress of financial problems and a new baby was too much for our relationship to survive. During the process of separating our lives, I have had time to reflect on the choices I made and the ways I participated in her manipulation of you. I was wrong. I knew it was wrong at the time, but I went along with it because it was easier than standing up for what was right. I am sorry. I know that apology cannot undo the damage that was done, but I wanted you to know that I recognize my fault and I accept responsibility. For what it is worth, Charlotte is a beautiful baby, and she deserves to know her grandmother. I am attaching my new phone number in case you ever want to arrange a visit. Whatever you decide, I wish you well." I read the letter several times, trying to understand my feelings. Derek had been a willing participant in my mistreatment. He had drafted the list of rules. He had supported Margot's cruelty at every turn. And now, facing the consequences of his own choices, he wanted absolution. I did not owe him absolution. I did not owe him anything. But the mention of Charlotte stirred something inside me, a hope I thought I had buried. I called the number he had provided. Derek answered on the second ring. "Vivian," he said, his voice cautious. "Thank you for calling. I did not receive your letter," I said, cutting through the pleasantries. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a moment. "I want to do the right thing," he said finally, "for once in my life. I want Charlotte to know her grandmother. I want to try to repair some of the damage Margot and I caused." "And what does Margot think about this?" Derek sighed. "Margot is not in a position to think clearly about anything right now. She is dealing with depression, with the divorce, with the reality of being a single mother. She blames everyone but herself for her problems. I do not think she will ever be able to apologize to you. But that does not mean Charlotte should be punished for her mother's mistakes." I considered his words carefully. He was right, of course. Charlotte was innocent. Whatever Margot had done, the baby had no part in it. "I will think about it," I told Derek. "That is all I can promise for now." I did think about it. For weeks, I weighed the potential joy of knowing my granddaughter against the potential pain of re-engaging with the family dynamics that had nearly destroyed me. I talked to Eleanor, to my therapist, to the support group members who understood my situation better than anyone else. In the end, I decided to try. Not for Margot, not for Derek, but for Charlotte. And for myself. Because walking away from an abusive relationship does not mean walking away from love. It means being more careful about where you invest it. I met Charlotte for the first time on a sunny April afternoon in a park near Derek's new apartment. She was 6 months old, with bright eyes and a curious expression, completely unaware of the complicated history swirling around her. Derek watched nervously as I held my granddaughter for the first time, clearly uncertain whether this reconciliation would succeed or fail. "Hello, Charlotte," I whispered. "I am your grandmother, Vivian. I have been waiting a long time to meet you." The baby looked up at me and smiled, a pure and simple expression of joy that cut through all the pain and resentment of the past year. In that moment, none of the drama mattered, none of the manipulation, none of the rejection, none of the cruel words spoken in anger. There was only this child, this new life, this chance to build something better. Derek and I established a careful routine. I visited Charlotte twice a month, always at neutral locations, always with clear boundaries about what we would and would not discuss. Margot was never mentioned. The past was never revisited. We focused entirely on the present, on building a relationship with Charlotte that was based on love rather than obligation. It was not perfect. There were awkward moments, old wounds that flared up unexpectedly, reminders of everything that had been lost. But there was also joy. There was the sound of Charlotte's laughter, the feel of her small hand gripping my finger, the knowledge that I would be part of her life in some small way. 2 years have passed since that September morning on the porch. I am 69 now, healthier and happier than I have been in decades. My relationship with Margot remains estranged. She has never apologized, never acknowledged the harm she caused, never shown any indication that she has grown or changed. But I have stopped waiting for her. I have stopped hoping that she will become the daughter I wanted her to be. I have accepted that some people are incapable of growth, and that accepting this reality is not cruelty, but wisdom. Charlotte knows me as Grandma Vi. She runs to me with open arms whenever I arrive for our visits. She does not understand the complicated history between me and her mother, and I pray that she never will. I want her to grow up believing that family is defined by love, not blood. That relationships require mutual respect and honesty. That nobody, no matter how much you love them, has the right to treat you like a doormat. Eleanor says I have become a different person. Stronger, she says, more complete. As if all the parts of you that were scattered have finally come together. She is right. The Vivian who gave away her house and her dignity in exchange for the illusion of love no longer exists. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who demands respect, who walks away from toxicity without looking back. A woman who has learned finally that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to be alone rather than badly accompanied. Theodore would be proud, I think. He gave me the financial security I needed to survive. But more than that, he gave me permission to value myself. His hidden gift was not really about money. It was about freedom. The freedom to choose my own path, even when that path led away from the people I loved most. If you are watching this, if you recognize yourself in any part of my story, I want you to know that there is hope. Not the hope of reconciliation necessarily. Some relationships cannot be saved. But there is hope for yourself. Hope for a life that is defined by your own choices rather than other people's expectations. Hope for peace, for dignity, for a future that belongs entirely to you. It took me 67 years to learn these lessons. I hope you learn them sooner. But if you are 67 or 77 or 87 and you are just beginning to understand that you deserve better, know this: it is never too late. It is never too late to walk away from people who hurt you. It is never too late to build a life that honors your worth. It is never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. My daughter threw my suitcase onto the front porch and told me to leave. And in that moment, I thought my life was ending. But it was not ending. It was beginning. Finally, after all those years, it was beginning. They took my house, my trust, my dreams of a loving family. And still, when everything was said and done, I was the one who walked away with the truth. The truth that love cannot be bought or forced or manipulated into existence. The truth that some people will never appreciate your sacrifices, no matter how great. The truth that the only person responsible for your happiness is yourself. Charlotte is learning to walk now. She takes tentative steps across the grass, reaching for my hands, trusting me to catch her if she falls. In her innocent face, I see everything that could have been and everything that still might be. A new generation, unburdened by old wounds, free to create its own definition of family and love. That is my inheritance to her. Not money, although there will be money when she is ready for it. not property or investments or material things. My inheritance to Charlotte is the story of a grandmother who learned, against all odds, that she was worthy of respect, that she was capable of walking away from pain, that she was strong enough to start over, even when starting over seemed impossible. And if she ever faces her own September morning, if she ever finds herself standing on a porch with her belongings scattered at her feet, I want her to remember my story. I want her to know that the ending does not have to be what it seems, that loss can become liberation, that grief can become growth, that the moment when everything falls apart is sometimes the moment when everything finally comes together. My name is Vivian Ashford. I am 69 years old, and this is the story of how my daughter's cruelty taught me the meaning of love. Did you enjoy this story? And which city are you listening from? Let us meet in the comments. If you like this story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I am looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There is so much more on my channel. Do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.